Hi and welcome to episode 49. This podcast was recorded on Aboriginal land and we stand in solidarity with our Indigenous brothers and sisters in their struggle against racism and capitalism.
Oh my darling, oh my darling, oh my darling party line. Oh, I never will forsake thee, for I love this life of mine.
Hi Omar.
How's it going?
Good, Jordan.
Hello.
Jordan, you told us to remind you about you missing someone.
Oh, yeah. I got a funny story. So I've been off work for the last 2 weeks and my boss was actually on leave for 2 weeks before that. So it's been a while since I saw my boss. So we had a meeting yesterday and at the end of the meeting I was like, oh, missed you.
That's really
And it was really awkward. And then he was like, missed you, and then hung up. So I think we both did it by accident.
Sounds like your boss is more class conscious than you are, which is a bit of an issue.
It was very funny.
Maybe next time you should say like, give me more money or...
Yeah, maybe you should like have a meet up with Jerem over coffee. He can give you some tactics on
Definitely. Unfortunately, he doesn't.
how to fight the class war.
He doesn't have any pay
power.
Yeah, it's not how it works, unfortunately.
Who is it, the minister?
Yeah, and the agency and all the random, it's public service.
Middle people,
all
yeah.
the bosses are just middle managers that, yep.
We've got a big episode coming up today. Later on in the ep, we're going to hear from Jono Sriranganathan, who is a member of the Greens up in Brisbane. He was a councillor in the Brisbane City Council, which is a massive council. And Jono recently wrote a bit of an article kind of comparing the Queensland Socialists with the Brisbane Greens and sort of more broadly the Greens with the Socialist Party. And so we thought it'd be a good opportunity to get Jono on the podcast to kind of talk through those questions, those issues a bit more.
Yeah, it should be a bit of a spicy debate.
So stick around for that.
Be good.
But we have some headlines that we'd like to go through.
This one's not on the list, but the Bulldogs one, and I do think we should have spoken about
It's
that.
just like absolutely
Nobody cares.
Like, yeah.
I do.
Yeah, but like, you're one of the only people in Australia who know who the Bulldogs are. Anyway, on to more important issues.
Fuck you, Jordan.
Yeah. There's a new book which is all about how to sell a genocide, which is some research that somebody, I think his name is Andrew Johnson, has done looking at the mainstream media and their coverage of the Gaza genocide. And I just saw a few headline stats. Like this study shows the New York Times, AP, Washington Post, CNN, etc. These are broadly centrist or liberal media outlets in the American Standard use the term savage 16 times about the killing of Israelis, i.e. the Palestinians were savage, but never once for the killing of Palestinians. Same thing, slaughter. Israelis were described as having been slaughtered 120 times, only once for the Palestinians. And the word massacre was used 344 times in relation to the Palestinians killing Israelis, never once in relationship to what was happening to the Palestinians. So basically, if you'd read these outlets, you would think that 50, 60, 70,000 Israelis had died in the last 3 years.
Not Palestinians.
Not the Palestinians.
Yeah.
It's fucking disgusting.
There was a really good article from Jeff Sparrow, sort of comparing the Australian situation to this research, and he talks about how this is basically exactly the same for the Australian press, and talked about how when there was the genocide going on against the Rohingya people, the Age wrote an editorial, which is, it's good they did this. They said that this is an absolute crime against humanity. This is a genocide. Australia should open the borders to allow people fleeing war and persecution, etc. Of course, they didn't do this for the Palestinian people. So there's it's a political bias that exists here because the Australian state, the Australian media, the Australian ruling class, they politically are tied into the Western Imperial Alliance, which means that you back up your political allies, and Israel is one of their political allies.
Yeah, every time the word genocide is mentioned on the radio, the presenter will say, of course, these genocide claims are disputed and by Israel and therefore, and we're not picking a side in this, even though like it's very clear what's happened. And it's even the terms like occupied territories to describe Palestinian territory has been removed in recent times from a whole bunch of outlets. So, it's a very clear and present danger to free speech and actually just basic understanding of the situation.
Yeah. Well, this one I saw this morning. One Nation wants to roll back abortion rights in Australia, and it is emboldening activists seeking US-style laws. So I'm just adding this to our list of things about how One Nation doesn't stand up for ordinary people, and they're pushing a very, very right-wing conservative barrow. And obviously, once a party like One Nation starts to get political support, starts to grow, they become a beacon for other people, other far-right issues. And of course, abortion rights are central to this. So Barnaby Joyce is actually speaking at an anti-abortion rally in Sydney on Thursday this week.
Yeah, I'm sure all those women living in the regions would be really pleased to know that the one facility within hundreds of kilometres of where they live would be destroyed if One Nation came to power. And that's the thing, these people pretend like they care about regional communities or whatever. They're really just interested in regional capitalism. And then, so the big businesses who can afford to do anything, if they want to get abortions, they'll go wherever. But they're never interested in improving healthcare, education, welfare for the people who are unfortunately stuck out there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like it is likely, particularly in South Australia, this has been an issue that's come up in Parliament quite a few times. Last year, just before the South Australian election, there was a bill to restrict access to abortion that lost by one vote because
Really?
Yeah,
God, South Australia, what are you doing?
literally. But one of those, they had one of those deals where it's like, okay, I need to go on leave, but so I'll have a deal where you don't vote or whatever while I go on leave, and it's something that the parties do. And then one of the parties broke that vote. Broke that deal. So a parliamentarian had to come rushing into the to make sure that women's access to abortion wasn't rolled back.
Does that mean Labor granted a conscience vote?
Yes. So Labor politicians were also among those who were voting, and now they've got Corey Bernardi or whatever in South Australia. Yeah, and it's they just defeated that bill by one vote, and now it's it's back on the menu. Yeah. In South Australia, so it's really quite horrifying.
Yeah. And we know from the polls now that women are less likely to support this position of banning abortion on religious grounds. Important article in the Australian Financial Review. The new religious divide, why young men now flock to church as women leave.
Yeah, it's Australian actually, but
oh, was it?
Yeah, they love the church even more than the AFR, I think.
Yeah, so it's talking about how for the first time in recent history, basically, there's more young men who are Christian than there are women.
Really?
Yeah, so 40% of young men are Christian apparently. Which I find kind of shocking.
Yeah, that is shocking.
Is it?
But then Omar said, no, it's 60% of men aren't Christian.
Yeah. And then there's, 4% or something that are Muslim, and maybe 2 or 3 that are Hindu, etc. So there would be other religious people. But Australia's one of the most secular places on
exactly.
Earth.
Yeah.
So
but that's why I thought the 40% number was
Yeah, but that would be Christian identifying. I mean, how many would go to church weekly?
True.
But it's I wonder how many of the young men who are starting to identify as Christian have been manosphere influenced, or a whole bunch of those right-wing internet personalities are God-fearing.
Yeah, Jesus said enslave your girlfriends and set up what's OnlyFans for them and stuff, right?
Exactly, yeah.
Pretty sure that's in the Bible somewhere.
Cool. Well, this seems to be your obsession, Omar. You've been talking
funny.
about this all week.
Yeah, this is part of the backlash against the CGT and just generally small business owners being the salt of the earth. Victims just constantly being victims. So Jess Wilson, the would-be Liberal Premier of Victoria, who has a real chance of getting in, I think, did a press conference this week with this businessman who owns a really expensive restaurant in Elstonwick with a very exclusive wine list. I looked it up. And this press conference was...
What's an exclusive wine list?
The wine's expensive as fuck, hundreds of dollars for a bottle kind of wine. $45 bottle, So very, very...
Not gossips.
I don't even know what that is, but yeah, like passion. What was it?
Passion pop.
Passion pop.
Well, that's not wine.
Well, yeah, not that. Anyway, so this press conference is all about how hard done by businesses are and how difficult it is and how he's struggling to survive and his company's going broke or whatever. Turns out this guy has been to jail multiple times. At the most recent one, he went to jail because he stole $200,000 from his child's childcare centre.
What?
The Liberals say they had no idea of his sinister past and claim they too were conned.
On Monday, restaurateur Perry Le Greco was presented by Liberal leader Jess Wilson as a victim of state government inaction.
Well, it's great to be here with Perry today.
But Le Greco has victims of his own.
He's not an upstanding citizen. He's a criminal. He's a thief.
Did you know about Perry's background?
No, and obviously if I did, I would not have stood beside him.
Why not?
Because I will always stand with victims of crime.
Why didn't the Liberal Party know?
Oh, because this man is clearly a fraudster. He's changed his name and it was not clear upon looking into the business or background checks that was the case.
He was on the board supporting, and he pilfered $200,000.
I love it.
And he went to jail for that. And so...
How do you do that? Like, how do you... Is it
Well,
like embezzling?
Yeah,
kind of
exactly.
thing?
It was embezzlement. And I mean, there's very small operations, like the local ones. And a lot of it's just like Mother's Day raffles and stuff to fundraise. And so there's just an account with a few $100,000 for a rainy day. He just took it all. And a bunch of it was actually the superannuation
classic.
payments for his staff, who never got
Naturally.
it back because he declared bankruptcy or whatever.
God, what an evil
So
man.
this guy is the one who the Liberals want to stand with. I mean, as if you couldn't have known that a restaurateur in Elstonwick is not...
is not the best person.
You're not a spokesperson for the Battlers, yeah. So that's the Liberal Party, which actually maybe that is why they're not going to... Maybe Hanson is going to take their place in the upcoming election because they got losers like him.
Yeah, they've got their own other brand of losers.
Yeah, that's
to stand
right.
with One Nation.
Well, so we've got a bit of a... We're back to the Eat the Rich section of the headlines.
Very strong undertones.
And they just deserve to be, expropriated.
Roasted, broiled.
Yeah, I was going to say pushed over the edge, but I meant it metaphorically.
No, we would never support any kind of violence against the rich.
Jordan doesn't have his T-shirt on today. Okay, so why Australia's richest person just made an $140 million bet on defence. So it's talking about Gina Rinehart has just done a bunch of investments into defence contracts and including like drone production. And Gina is actually following a trend of a bunch of wealthy people around the world who are noticing that we're entering into a pretty heightened imperial moment. And there's lots of money to be made out of that, actually. You can make a lot of cash if you invest into defence manufacturing at the moment.
Yeah, I don't like how they called it a bet because it's like guaranteed.
It's a very safe bet, isn't it?
Yeah.
Weapons of mass destruction are a good thing. And the other thing is like the whole military industrial kind of world is so kind of like state underwritten,
totally.
They would call it socialist, but it's not socialism, but it's like state centric. It's all just handouts. And that's why they all go massively over budget. Imagine if the construction industry went as over budget as the military industry, it would be like even more front page news than it already is. But when the military industrial complex does it, it's just like, the cost of doing business.
Totally.
Yeah.
So everything runs billions and billions and billions of dollars over, and it's guaranteed profit. So, to be honest, $140 million for Gina.
Doesn't seem that much.
Yeah. What did she just like raid one of her kids' like weekly allowance or something?
Is that like less than what she spent on that private jet for Pauline Hanson?
Seriously, $140 million. God, step it up, Gina. We got World War III coming.
What about John? You want to tell us about this one?
Is this about the... I haven't read this.
I can do this one.
Yeah.
This is an AFR Financial Review classic. So this headline made me really interested. Like when I saw it, I was like, oh, wow. And that's what it's designed to do. It says the top 1% would have paid $400,000 more in tax under Labor's plan. This is in response to the recent CGT trust stuff.
Sounds good.
$100,000.
Yeah, it does.
And then you click the link and it says the Treasury Department Secretary, I think it was, said that if this policy had been in for the last 25 years, that each one of them would have paid this much more
Yeah.
over that 25 year, which works out to about 20 grand a year, roughly, which I thought would probably be the annual toilet paper budget.
Well, I think it's good to compare this article, okay, so $400,000 over 25 years, to the article that's been come out about the growth in wealth of Australia's richest people. So we have 178 billionaires in this country. What?
Yeah.
But those 178 billionaires are $25.7 billion richer than last year.
Fuck, they must have worked so hard.
So $20,000 a year.
Imagine how hard you have to work to make that much money.
And so guess how much 2.5, I can't even imagine it to be $25 billion a year. Guess what that is a minute? $50,000.
Yep.
Sweet.
$50,000 a minute extra. And that's not even just like how much they're earning a minute. That's how much extra they're earning a minute than they did last year.
How does that compare to your annual income? Oh, okay.
It's like more.
Yes, not much less than mine, that's for sure. So it's crazy. It's crazy.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, how many people live in poverty? Like nearly 3-4 million?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the second half of the headline. I like that. I don't like this. Every time, because AFR does a rich list every year, and then Oxfam does their like rich list every year immediately after. I think it really puts stuff in perspective.
Totally.
Like 178 of these people.
I think Oxfam, she was on the radio this morning, the spokesperson, she said 20 people have more wealth than the bottom 3 million people.
Yeah.
So it's like the socialist policy to just tax. I mean, our policy is fairly moderate, really. It's just 10% wealth tax. Like, it could probably be a lot higher, but
I mean, that's one part of the policy.
Yeah, exactly. But just 10% of these people's wealth would be able to deal with so many of the issues in our society.
But
even just having them exist at all is really a question, in my opinion.
You guys can rest easy though.
Yeah.
Because the Fair Work Commission has come to save everybody by increasing the minimum wage.
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Oh, good.
What are people getting? How many cents?
It's about, I think, $100 a week that people are getting. So that's nice.
$100 a week.
Might pay for like half of someone's grocery bill or...
What's that as a percentage of $50,000 a minute?
I don't know.
500, 1/500th.
Yeah, it's got to have lots of zeros, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, 4.75% pay rise, which is just like absolutely nothing. Like considering how much inflation has gone up, considering the interest rates that, have gone up, like my sister just got another increase on her mortgage, another $30 a fortnight. It went up a couple of months ago already. Like this just does not even begin to cover people's costs, the increase in people's costs. It's just revolting.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people, there's not that many people on the minimum wage, but there's a lot of people whose EBAs are tied to the minimum wage.
Yeah.
And so this actually affects millions of people, even though the number of positions that are minimum wage specific is only a couple 100,000, I think. But there's millions of EBAs that are tied to it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you guys a question. Who do you think the government's listening to? The people who are earning an extra $50,000 a minute, or the people who just got a 4.75% pay rise? Who's kind of more important to the government in that?
Gee whiz, hard to say.
We live in a democracy, I reckon, so maybe we all listen to equally.
Well, according to the Australian Financial Review, the billionaire barons have every right to use their money to influence us.
Oh, that's such a good take.
So I think maybe the government's listening to the billionaire barons with heaps of money. Yeah.
Why would you write that?
Well,
like what?
Do we have the right to like storm their buildings with pitchforks?
No.
No, we don't.
No.
That's against the rules.
Yeah. But I really like the article.
It's crazy.
Because the first sort of like third or fifth of the article is like, America's such a bad place, America's really crap. It's like you got all of these really wealthy people and they have all of these like private interest groups and they're so not transparent. There's nothing transparent about it. You can't see who's doing, and there's no laws and everybody can. But Australia.
Are they saying like
Australia's so good?
I've always thought that.
Because it's so transparent. We know exactly who Gina Rinehart's giving money to. Like, it's all there, publicly listed. And
That
of
changes
course they-
everything. That changes everything. That's why Australia is such a socialist paradise.
Yeah, because we just know we've got the transparency.
Yeah, housing's distributed equally. People can afford to live. Yeah, the healthcare system's just going really well.
So thanks a lot to the Australian Financial Review for, just giving the social license that Gina Rinehart really needed.
Yeah. Someone's got to fight for her. She can't fight for herself. She doesn't own like half the media.
So, yeah. Thanks, Ava.
Who are these people? Like, fucking imagine writing that.
Riding out the party line.
So welcome to the podcast, Jono.
Hey.
We're really happy to have you on. We know that a couple of weeks ago, you wrote a bit of an article comparing the Socialist Party with the Greens. So we wanted to get into some of that and what you think about that and sort of where to for Australian politics. But before we get into the meat of it, we wanted you to just give a bit of a background of who you are for our listeners. People might not necessarily be familiar with the work that you've done up in Brisbane. So it'd be lovely if you could just introduce yourself a bit and your political background.
Yeah, thanks. So I'm Jonathan Sriranganathan. I currently live on Yagara and Turrbal country in so-called Brizzy, and been born and raised in Brisbane, lived here my whole life. My mum's settler white Australian and uppers are Jaffna Tamil, like northern Sri Lanka. And I think his experiences as sort of a migrant, as his family are all refugees trying to get out of Sri Lanka during the Civil War, that probably politicized me quite early on in life. Like I remember being like in early primary school, the first time Pauline Hanson popped up on the scene, and that was like quite shocking. And I think got me paying a lot of attention to sort of racism and the whole John Howard era kind of thing. Went to public school in Brizzy, studied law and arts at university at UQ. And I think probably the most relevant stuff is that from about 2013, 2014, I started to get involved with the Queensland Greens. And that was partly because having been involved a little bit in other sorts of activism like climate stuff or refugee rights stuff, I was surprised to discover how weak the Greens were at that particular time in Brisbane. Like I remember going along to one of the South Brisbane Greens branch meetings, and it was like 5 or 6 people in the room, mostly like median age of like 50 or 60.
Yeah.
And I was like, what? So all of us had been doing other forms of activism, and it sort of struck me that it was important to have a strong political wing to the broader movement. And so I put a bit of time into helping build up the Greens. And in 2016, I ran and was successful in winning the Gabba ward of Brisbane City Council. So for listeners who don't know, BCC is a very big city council, well over 1 million voters. And my ward of the Gabba ward had something like 30,000, 40,000 registered voters at the time. And when you win that seat, it's a little bit different to a lot of councils around Australia in that it's a full-time salary. You get 2 paid staff, you get an office, you get a council-funded vehicle.
So it's
you
sort
get
of
a lot
more
of resources.
Like being an MP or...
Much more similar to a state MP in terms of, both the resources that attach to it, but perhaps also the platform that you can build off it. And I was maybe a little bit unusual compared to some councillors in that I started using social media a bit earlier and was pretty good at building a profile and saying edgy things that then got the media more interested in me. So I was successful again in 2020. I was re-elected with a really big swing. And so that first election was really the breakthrough for the Greens in Brizzy. Up until then, we'd just had Larissa Waters as a Queensland Greens senator who'd been sitting there since 2010. And the party had, I would say, kind of been stagnating. And myself and other young comrades, we got involved in the Greens. And sort of saw almost a little bit of a power vacuum where it was sort of up for grabs what the direction of the party would head in. And until that time, I'd say the Queensland Greens were one of the most conservative state parties out of the Australian Greens Federation. And we pushed them to take a more sort of a broader, kind of more social democratic, or you might say almost anti-capitalist positioning, and started talking more about housing justice and economic redistribution and all that sort of stuff, rather than just purely talking about koalas and climate change, which I think the Greens in Queensland had lent on a little too heavily. So by the time we came around to the 2020 council election, the Greens were a lot stronger. We'd won the state seat of Maywa in 2017, and then we won the state seat of South Brisbane in 2020 that overlapped with my council ward. And so, yeah, it was kind of a time of pretty good growth and a lot of contestation within the party about which directions the movement should take. And I put a lot of effort into a sort of strong focus on participatory democracy, because my big thing is decentralizing and localizing power. So I'm very cynical of like you guys probably, hierarchical systems where one person at the top has all the power. I'm very keen on working up democratic systems for how we share and distribute power to insulate against corruption and co-option. So alongside that sort of party building work, I was really using my local ward office as a hub for activism and organising. So rather than spending all our ward office budget on like sending out fridge magnets or letters to residents, we bought a PA system and then another PA system and then like crates of equipment and barbecues and all this sort of stuff that so it got to the point where almost any rally or protest that was happening in Brisbane was rocking up to my office, not just to borrow equipment, but also to co-strategize. And so there were some forms of action, even some of like the Extinction Rebellion stuff, where I was putting my name down on paper as the lead organizer, partly just to lodge the notice of intention to hold a peaceful assembly with the police, and partly to be kind of like the fall guy so that the state would turn its eyes upon me and give a bit more breathing room to other activists who were maybe more vulnerable to state oppression because they weren't insulated by being an elected representative. So there were some kinds of activism that I was really involved in as a co-organizer. And then there was other examples where I was just more of a participant. And you guys mentioned off air the Kangaroo Point refugee rights protests that really kicked off in 2020. And so I was sort of playing the sort of role I often play in those spaces, which is to be trying to support the movement, using my platform to amplify struggle, but not necessarily centering myself and trying not to be the sole decision maker. And that's as an elected rep, that's a really interesting tension point, because you're trying to resource and support the movement and you're one of the only people who's being paid full time and you've still got all these other constituents and other commitments. But yeah, there's a tendency for the media to want to go to you as a spokesperson, and you're constantly saying to the media, no, talk to these people instead. So yeah, it was an interesting learning period for me. And then got to 2023 and I decided I didn't want to sit for another 4-year term as an elected rep. So stepped down from the role of councillor. Had a crack at running for Lord Mayor of Brisbane, not intending to win, but just to broaden the base.
You didn't want to be a Lord.
It's the wildest title, isn't it? That was a fun campaign.
You could have been Lord Jono.
Oh man, we had all sorts of jokes about it's Brisbane politics is wild, right? Because although it's a capital city and somewhat progressive, the Liberals control 20 of the 27 seats on Brisbane City Council, so an incredibly conservative political environment.
That's crazy,
yeah. But I managed to get like about just over 1 in 5 Brisbane residents voted for me ahead of the major parties, which was a really strong result. And that was around the time that Max had just won the federal seat of Griffith. But I think after I sort of stepped down from after the mayoral campaign wrapped up, I've become a dad more recently. So I'm now taking a bit more of a backseat and doing more thinking and writing angry rants on social media rather than quite as much organising.
Well, congratulations on becoming a dad.
Thanks.
I can relate to that,
Yeah, we talk to Omar on the pod a lot about his baby, so me and Geordie are learning a lot over the course of the podcast about that.
Lots of wisdom to impart. How to hold it.
But so, you mentioned just at the end there that sort of where you're kind of at now in terms of some of the work you're doing is the writing on your blog. And I've sort of read through a bunch of the pieces on there, kind of like quite a bit about Greens politics and the direction of the party, but then also other political questions as well.
You did that good one recently on the banned phrases, which we won't ask you to repeat, but
I
heard you crossed the border to publish that one.
It depends where you're broadcasting what I'm allowed to say, doesn't it? It's crazy times.
Exactly. But so one of the most recent pieces that you wrote on the blog was in light of the Stafford by-election, where one of our comrades, Liam Parry, ran in that by-election, and you did an interview with him on your podcast, as well as sort of writing this article that was a bit of a comparison between the Socialists and the Greens. And do you want to just give us a bit of a summary of what you were trying to do in that article, what your thinking was behind it?
Yeah, and cut me off if I'm rambling too much, but it was specifically trying to compare the Queensland Greens and the Queensland Socialists, and I think that's probably important to highlight because I think there's a lot of diversity across the country between the different state Greens parties that's not always visible if you focus analysis primarily on what the federal Australian Greens party room's up to. But I think I listened to one of your previous episodes. I don't think I actually said that the Greens and the Socialists are the same. I think what I was really trying to tease out was the fact that the Socialists seem to be adopting a pretty similar strategy to the Queensland Greens at the moment, which is basically you have a big long-term vision for much more transformational change, like really shaking things up, but you don't necessarily say all of that front-loaded to a voter when you're running for election. You put forward policies that are kind of achievable or maybe just outside the parameters of mainstream debate that would theoretically be achievable under the current capitalist system. And that's kind of a stepping stone to open up opportunities for bigger changes down the track. And so like examples of this, both Queensland Socialists and Queensland Greens have been calling for a variation of a rent freeze. And to me, that's like a social democratic reform. That's not fully anti-capitalist. It's still presuming the continued existence of landlords. But the Greens do that because we know that that's where we can kind of win over enough voters and build a big enough of a coalition to maybe get a win on that front, even though long-term we might want to make bigger changes. And so I guess, yeah, my point there was that both the Greens and the Socialists are moderating the message a little bit in order to, bring enough people on board for a conversation and then hopefully take them further along conversations about change down the track. And I guess the same is the case in terms of...
Well, could we stop there maybe
and
sure, address that part? Just that theme? Because I think it's definitely true that the election policies have quite a lot of similarities. But I guess the way I see it is like for Victorian Socialists, which is what I've been most a part of, and I guess the Socialist Party federally, like that program is sort of like our minimum, like our sort of non-negotiables, our like most concrete, immediate things. Whereas like, I think the reality of the Greens is they're sort of like the vision. That's like the maximum demands really. And then when you look at what actually happens with Greens in power is like a fraction of that. Whereas like, like, we've promised our listeners many times that as MPs, we would like not vote for things short of this. Like this is our basic principles. Whereas to me, like the Greens commitment to like environmental policy that's more transformative than what we have now is like undermined by the fact that they vote for every rubbish Labor bill with a 5% improvement. Do you know what I mean?
And I think we're straying into the conversation about how we use power, which I think is probably the more fundamental important thing than what policies parties campaign for. But I would suggest that when Greens members are deciding what our policy platform should be, or when people are debating, okay, what do we take to the election? A big piece of the puzzle is, well, what can we convince voters to accept? And there will be lots of people in the room saying, no, we should go further. Even in my mayoral campaign, I was like wanting to push a little bit further in terms of renters' rights and saying we should call for a state-mandated rent cut. And other people in the party were like, oh, we would love to do that too, but we're worried it won't be quite palatable to enough of the voters we're trying to win over. So the party is making those compromises with the electoral platform. But I don't think it's correct to say that that's the maximum long-term vision. I think if you talk to the average party member and said, if the Greens could achieve everything in the platform, would you stop there or would you want to make more changes? Of course, people would say they want to make more changes. But I think the other interesting question I kind of have for you guys as well is like, when you say your policy platform is the bare minimum or is our non-negotiables, does that mean you wouldn't support an incremental reform that gets you halfway there? So for example, let's say your policy is for a 5-year rent freeze or something like that. I can't remember what it was exactly. But what if the government says, we're just going to introduce a 1-year rent freeze? I presume future socialist MPs would still vote in favour of that, right? Or would you hold out and say, no, we're not happy with a 1-year rent freeze. Our policy is 5-year rent freeze. It's that or nothing.
I think that's a really good question. Because, sorry, I think there's a bit of a delay.
You're
because
right.
you know, like if that was the question, if it was like, well, we want a 5-year rent freeze, and the you know, the alternative thing that came up was like, well, would we accept 1 year? If the question was like, would we accept 1 year, or would you accept 1 year, but also like 900 renters have to die and all this other bad stuff has to happen?
Yeah.
Then like, no, obviously not. No, but that is genuinely what happens at a federal level, particularly like, you know, with the HAF, with the recent environmental reforms and stuff like that. That is the compromise that the Greens make at least at a federal level, and we wouldn't make those compromises.
Yeah, because if there's no strings attached, then that's very easy. But the problem is that like a lot of the time, the strings attached undermine the slight improvement that is made. Or so if there was like a 1 year rent freeze, but at the same time we're going to give $500 million to developers to build private housing. Well, definitely we wouldn't support that. We would move an amendment to divide the bill or something, and we'd only support one. But like, we're not going to support $500 million to developers, you know?
No, and I think, and sorry to cut you off, but I think there's sort of two different difficult questions that elected reps are often forced to make. Sometimes there's the question of, this thing is a net good, it's a minor incremental reform. Passing it will materially improve the lives of the people we're representing, but passing it will also de-escalate political pressure to push for bigger changes. And I think I could point to numerous bills that the Greens have supported over the years. So like even the most recent changes to the federal environmental protection framework, they were probably arguably on balance a net good. They did on balance improve things more than they made things worse. I still don't think the Greens should have supported them though. I think the Greens should have held out for much more and said, no, this isn't good enough. We want bigger changes. We want stronger protections. But that was a case where once the Labor passes that very piss-weak environmental bill, then that takes all the pressure off and there's not enough political will to galvanize bigger reforms. So there's those kinds of questions. And I think that's actually a really hard question for both Radical Greens members and Socialists, is if you can get a minor win that doesn't have any significant negative impacts on the ground, but de-escalates pressure for bigger changes, do you still support it? And then there's the kinds of bills that have some good bits and some bad bits, and it's actually quite muddy to say whether they're even good or bad at the end of the day. So like I'm not here to defend the Greens. I've been very publicly critical of the Greens supporting HAF. I've been very publicly critical of them supporting the climate safeguards bill, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
but
and
one of the key points of my article was that the question that I hope the Socialist parties are turning their minds to, and that I don't think the Greens have answered, is how do you ensure that your elected representatives aren't co-opted by the political establishment? Because I think it is actually a little bit naive to say, oh, our elected reps, if we had Socialists in power, they would never compromise or sell out in that way, because it's sort of assuming that the types of people who get pre-selected are like these superhumans who are immune to the political pressures of being an elected representative and are going to be insulated from that co-opting force. And that was sort of the other thing that I said was kind of similar between the Greens and the Socialists, is that when you look at the party's structure and framework, it's neither the Greens nor the Socialists appear to be, you cut me off and correct me on this, but neither of them appear to be binding their elected reps and saying that before you vote on anything in Parliament, you have to run it past the entire party membership. The Greens don't do that. Maybe they should. And I'm not sure if Socialists are imagining that that's how you do it, but it's not really a question of what do the Greens as a party do. It's how does the Greens membership and the broader movement hold their elected reps accountable and stop them bowing to pressure from the establishment? That's the really interesting question.
I think that it is right to connect those two questions. And going back a step, I think that it's really right to be critical of the housing and climate bills that the Greens passed. Critical that they passed them specifically because of the fact that they're worse than nothing, even if there are some slight policy positions or policy changes that might do slight improvements for the climate. They destroyed the climate movement and the push around them. But I think that the questions are connected, because what actually is your political vision and approach for what needs to be done? And I think that points to how do you think that your MPs could be accountable and, democratically controlled and all the rest of it. It's what's the purpose of going into politics? What's the purpose of building a political party? When I was doing a bit of research ahead of this podcast and the interview with you, I read an article by Jonathan Sriranganathan, who's a socialist, I believe from Queensland, talking about the formation of the Greens back in the 90s. And, from the very get-go of the formation of the Greens as a federal party, there was moves to push out the more radical political elements. Before there was even a founding conference, socialists were proscribed. They were banned from holding dual membership of socialist parties and being in the Greens party, which indicates a political approach about what's trying to be built. You're not trying to build a socialist party that is trying to transform the nature of Australian capitalism, put more power in the hands of working class people, build a radical political movement. The intent is to build a political party, from the eyes of Bob Brown and Drew Hutton, that was a new way for Australian politics, the sort of neither left nor right, but like sort of forwards kind of political approach. And so I think it is important to go back to that stuff, because it's what was the intention of building a force in Australian politics? And our intention in building a force in Australian politics is to build a radical socialist movement. And I think that is pretty key.
Sure. Yeah, but I think you're right in broadly characterising the fact that a lot of the early PIP members who helped form the Greens were probably in some ways more reformists, and you're right. There was I think a really problematic history of, it wasn't just pushing out saying to people who were socialists, you can't be members of two political parties. The Greens they were very worried about entryism from Labor members as well. And they just had this strict rule, can't be members of two parties at once, which, I don't love, but I think it's not the most interesting question. But what your critique kind of seems to be doing is saying that the party was founded in this particular way, and that sets an upper limit on what it could ever be. But right from the start, even though some of the radical elements were pushed out, there were competing currents within the Greens. I think the New South Wales Greens have generally been a much more radical political force than, say, the Victorian or Tasmanian Greens. I think Queensland has swung a bit like a pendulum depending on who's on key committees. But I think I would argue that there are lots of Greens members, not just in Queensland, but around the country, who do want the sorts of big transformational changes that you guys are also pushing for and arguing. And so really the question is, like, how do we use power and what is our theory of change? And I think that's where, like, running for office, for me, and I think for a lot of Greens, that's not the end game. The main game is to build power in the community, to support direct action, to grow grassroots movements, and then also have a foot in the electoral chamber so you can have those people to shield the movement from the coercive power of the state to some extent, and to keep pushing more radical demands and building power. I think there'd be, within, like, say, current cohorts of Greens reps and leadership figures, there'd be a really diverse range of views about what the long-term theory of change is. And I guess what I'm really trying to impress upon you is that it is a mistake to talk about the Greens as kind of a homogenous, monolithic entity.
No,
There's
totally.
a really broad range of perspectives and theories of change.
Yeah, I agree. I spent like 6 years in Sydney, and we worked quite closely with both young Greens who there were fairly radical and are involved. Like, we've spoken to Tom Rowley on this show before, and he's involved in anti-cop stuff.
Anti-cop,
and, a bunch of other things. And, I knew him 13 years ago or something, and other people. The thing is, some of the people who were, for example, involved in Left Renewal have actually joined New South Wales Socialists because they've sort of been frustrated by that. Lee Rhiannon was pushed out of the party, and actually nobody really defended her in any position of institutional power. And for those who don't remember, because you're too young, Lee Rhiannon was an old Communist Party person. Obviously some big differences with her politics, but like a staunch leftist, I think you would say. And she was driven out and by, I think, Dean Natali. Was it his era? Or maybe just after?
I feel like it might have even been after that.
It might have been just after.
Because, like, say someone like Bob Brown is still down in the Tasmanian Greens, involved in shaping and influencing the direction of the party, even though he's no longer an MP, right?
It might have been after him. But it was like, it was so I think like there are differences for sure, and the Victorian Greens are pretty mediocre, it has to be said. But the thing that unites them is like to be in a party with people like Sarah Hanson-Young and even Nick McKim, who's got some good policies. Like he was an investment banker, like he's very much a capitalist guy, like he's for a kind of a nicer capitalism, and that's fine. But like that's his worldview. Like so,
and is that what? Sorry to interrupt, but is that what he's said, or do we just infer that from his past roles and the sort of? Because like
it's his class position. It's like that. Yeah. Like you refer often, I think, to competing forces within the Greens and stuff like that, and we have competing forces in the Socialists, but it's not competing class forces. There are some Greens MPs who are literally property investors, and that's messed up, and I don't think they should be eligible to sit as MPs if they own investment properties. But yeah, I take your point. I'm not here arguing that.
So the spectrum of politics, I guess, between the Socialists and the Greens is very different. Like there is a debate you don't have to be a revolutionary, you don't have to be a Marxist to be in the Socialist Party, but you do have to identify as a socialist and anti-capitalist. And there are people in the Greens for sure who are both anti-capitalist and socialist. I know that. But the point is like they're not setting the agenda. The party as a whole is not anti-capitalist, consciously so. And I think in one of your writings, you actually, I think you said that it's good that it's not consciously socialist. I'm not sure whether you think it should be consciously anti-capitalist, but that's like a very deliberate choice.
But by consciously, do we mean our public messaging, or do we mean like the what people say in their heads kind of thing? Yeah, because I definitely think the Greens should be very publicly, very strongly critical of capitalism and articulating a strong critique of capitalism. I'd probably also, and we could come to this later maybe, but suggest that like if you're trying to meet voters where they're at and you're trying to bring people on a journey towards a more radical or transformational vision of society, you've got to use the lingo that works for people. And talking through a frame of capitalism and socialism and class consciousness really works for some people, and it turns off other people. And that's like, I don't know whether that's the right call for the Greens to be making, but I can understand why they make it. That even if your long-term goal is major transformation of economic and political systems, you want to lead people there slowly. I'm definitely much more in the say what you really mean, call for the maximalist position, argue for it strongly, try to win people over to that position. But I think like what the socialists are doing as well, and this is what I said in the article, is that we are all to some extent moderating our public messaging to appeal to voters who aren't yet fully on board. Like I saw that in the Stafford by-election campaign. I've seen that in Vic Socialist campaign materials. It's no diss on you. I think it's a smart political move. You don't necessarily spend all your time talking about the big long-term revolutionary vision. You talk about the immediate changes you want to make. And I think that's a politically defensible strategy.
So the way that I think about it is what we're trying to do is not just meet people where they're at. What we're trying to do is to relate to the experience of people and the fact that there is low political horizons in Australian politics because of the degradation of working class life and the destruction of unions and the, collapse of the left and all the rest of it. But I think that our task is actually to raise people's political horizons as much as possible.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, we're on the same page there.
And I think that that we want to actually spend a bit of time with people talking about the bigger, broader political questions, because we want to be honest with people about our capacity to fight for what we actually need to fight for. So, oftentimes I talk to people on the polling booths or at the door and they say, well, you're never going to be able to achieve any of this. And I say, yeah, if we get one person into Parliament, if we get 5 people into Parliament, we're not going to be able to achieve this. But we're trying to build a political movement that can fight not just in Parliament, but on the streets, in workplaces to make this happen. And so there has to be also a political honesty with people about the fact that the framework of Parliament is not just going to be the only thing that gets us to where we need to go. But I raised the stuff about the nature of like the sort of formation of the Greens, and then Omar's added some of the stuff about there is a wide variety of opinions inside the Greens, but there's a political leadership that sort of sets decisions, because I think it is a really important demarcation between sort of the approach of working within the Greens and then the approach of building the Socialist Party, because we don't have to fight to insert a radical socialist political vision. That's the politics of the party that is trying to be built up, and I think that it is an important differentiation. So how you're building that sort of matters. And I think the fact that we put the argument of socialism front and center, we say vote socialist, put people before profit, vote socialist. In saying that, we are trying to actually win people to an argument that it is socialist politics, which is necessary to fundamentally change society, which, I've worked with a lot of left-wing Greens members and stuff like that as well. But I think that is different to the argument that we need Greens politics. I think those things are separate.
And we probably don't have time for a long political theory discussion about the different threads of Green politics.
Sure.
But I would argue that Green politics is by implication and of necessity anti-capitalist as well. Like when you look at what the Greens' long-term aims are and their charter and constitution, all that, like there's no way you can achieve any of that stuff under a capitalist system. You have to move beyond.
Do you have any example of that? Just for me, I might be a bit slow.
Yeah, look, I think I've pulled out a couple of quotes in the article, but like the Greens talk about political, economic, social transformation. I don't think the Constitution explicitly uses the words socialism and capitalism, and I have issues with that. But there's clearly an intention of pretty big fundamental change.
The abstract, I reckon.
Yes, it's about the practice, right? It's about how do you actually use power and how do you do things in the here and now.
Yeah, and I guess that's the connection between MPs and the movement. Because for example, the climate movement was insurgent 2019. COVID obviously interrupted it. So it's not all the movement's fault. But then when Labor gets elected, there's this feeling, and Labor's deliberately cultivating it, we're fixing it. The climate wars are over. We've got this policy. We've got these net zero targets. Do you know that net zero means solutions to everything? Great. And then the Greens initially are like, no, that's not really good enough correctly. But then they feel the pressure of the establishment, the media, the corporate lobbyists, etc. And they go, you know what? Everyone's saying we're making the perfect enemy of the good. Shit, we can't be wedged like that. So we're going to sign off on this bill. And then we're going to go out and convince people that these bills are a step forward. So in that sense, it's not just that the Greens vote for these bills, it's that they then have to say, because they voted for them, these are actually decent bills that it was right to vote for. And that's sort of the worst part in a way. Whereas if you're a socialist, we would accept that we would be wedged. Yeah, we're going to be wedged. The Labor Party are going to try and fuck us, blame us for some shitty policy not getting passed. But that's about us educating our supporters and having a Democratic Party that stands by the decisions of the MPs who don't get to make their own calls. The party definitely decides. And then being prepared to cop some flack sometimes, because in the long run, winning the argument that actually, saving the planet is going to require an abolition of capitalism. I agree with you on that. But you say that, and then your party leadership vote for a legislation that says all we're going to do is report every year on our targets.
It's,
you know what I mean?
It's very disappointing. So talk to me more about how in practice, and I know you guys are still working this out because the party's still going, but let's say you've got a socialist MP in Parliament and things have gone well in the election and you actually have the balance of power. So your vote tangibly matters to whether legislation gets passed or not. And with a couple of days notice, I know this is a hypothetical, but I think it's an important one because this sort of stuff does happen. A couple of days notice, the government puts forward a bill that is good in some ways. Maybe it slightly raises the minimum wage, or it's halfway towards scrapping negative gearing or whatever. It's probably a slight net good. And you've got a couple of days as an MP to decide, do I support that bill? Yes or no? Is there a process that the sort of party's constitution has set out, or is that still to be worked out down the track?
I think it's still to be worked out, but in the Constitution, yeah. I think in the draft Constitution, which we're having a founding conference in a couple of months, so we don't even have a national constitution yet. That's coming. But it definitely says MPs are subordinate to the elected party executive and to the party as a whole. That's very clear. So the MPs, like their caucus, is not a leadership committee in any way, which is fundamentally different to every other party, I think.
Yeah. So maybe is it maybe useful for me to sketch out how I think the Greens have been co-opted and what are some of the key pressures that have led to a situation. Yeah. So please, even putting aside the fact that the originators of the party were probably not as radical on balance as the founders of the new socialist parties, there would have been plenty of Greens members who had a very big transformative vision for society, like fundamentally changing how we grow food, how we build housing, how we structure economy, all that sort of stuff. Gradually, after a lot of building, after a lot of campaigning, they start to win a few seats here and there. And suddenly you've got these elected reps who are responsible to a party. They're also responsible to a kind of broader lefty movement, some of who are volunteers and party members and some of who aren't. And then they're responsive to an electorate, which is largely comprised of people who are not yet as radical as the Greens membership or not quite as on board. Now, those elected reps are coming under pressure from residents in their own electorate. As you sort of allude to, Omar, they're coming under pressure from the media establishment, et cetera, et cetera. And what happens as a matter of practice, I'm telling you this as someone who's been an elected representative, you don't have time to talk to everyone. You start to sort of defer to trusted people. You might just defer to certain lobby groups or like a resident action group, or there might be a particular climate action group that you take your lead from strategically. And if they say, I think this is a good local law to pass, you'd be like, all right, I'll pass it. Because you don't, maybe you should find the way to have more resources, but you don't actually have time to talk to everyone in your movement. And then what starts to happen over time is that the party membership is like, we don't quite have enough influence over how our MPs are voting in Parliament or Council. We want a bit more of the say. And then the party says, okay, we'll create a parliamentary liaison committee, or we'll create some kind of executive committee. And those are elected members of the party, and they're meant to advise and guide and control the MPs. But then over time, what tends to happen is that the MPs are making so many decisions. We're talking about like dozens of decisions a week, how to vote on certain bills, what to say to the media about some emerging issue, how to allocate grants money, who to write a letter of support for on some particular local issue. The executive committee, those volunteer members of your party, they don't actually have enough time to meaningfully scrutinize and evaluate and guide all the decisions that the MPs are making. And so then over time, you have this emergence of a class of people within the party who might not be the elected reps, but they're the only people who have enough free time really to be on these time-intensive committees. Some of them might be former staffers, or some of them might be the type of people who they get paid to campaign and they take on a campaign manager role at election time, and the rest of the time they're in a volunteer role. But you get this emergent layer, which is, it's not just the MPs, it's like the MPs and the MP staff, and then it's some very active party volunteers, and then it's some party staff who are employed by the party, not the party MPs. And so this layer emerges of people who are kind of the establishment within the party, and they are really sensitive to the risk of losing seats. They're sensitive to polling. They're sensitive to media pressure. And they are often the people who are enabling this kind of compromise or reformist approach that they then push down to the membership, and they say, sorry, guys, we had to do it this way because we were worried about what the Courier Mail would print about us. And so what my article was sort of pointing out is that I don't yet see anything in the structure or the DNA of the new socialist parties that strongly insulates against that same process happening over decades as you get MPs. Like right now, it's very easy for a small party to say, our MPs wouldn't sell out, but you haven't had MPs yet and you haven't fully witnessed the kinds of pressure they are under to compromise. And so I guess I offer it as a provocation to be like, well, what will you do differently at a tangible, practical level to ensure those same processes don't? And I think the idea of capping salaries is a great one, but I don't think it's enough by itself.
No, that's just like one small part. Like, I think there's a few things to unpack there. Like, number one, like we don't believe the MPs, like if we have elected MPs, and like we do have, like a councillor in Bendigo, we had a councillor in Footscray, we don't believe that these are special or privileged positions in any way. They're accountable to the party. You're subordinate to the party. Wherefore recallable, representatives. So like, if there wouldn't be a position where there's an elected MP trying to sell like why we had to do this bad thing or whatever, it'd be like, you're recalled. Next one, you're being replaced, you're expelled or whatever. There's also like you reference being.
But can I jump in there, John? Because like, and maybe this is the anarchist in me coming through, but like, let's say you're successful and you're an elected rep.
Yeah.
You have a following. You are a charismatic leader of a
Sure.
kind.
Yeah.
I like you. So if you turn around to a bunch of members and most of them are busy with their other jobs and they haven't had quite as much time to follow the debates in detail, and you go to a state council meeting and you make this really compelling argument of like, this is why I really want to support this reform. I know it doesn't get us far enough, but I really think we need to do it. A lot of people will probably just listen to you because they like you and they trust you. And I accept that there's a mechanism to recall MPs. And similarly, in the Greens, we can prompt an urgent pre-selection and we could unpre-select someone who's already a sitting MP if we're really unhappy with them. But once you get those reps, you're so thrilled that you've got a rep and you don't want to destabilize them by like triggering a by-election. And so, sorry to interrupt, but I just think it's a little naive to assume that when you've just got one or two MPs and everyone's so excited that you finally got an MP that the membership is just going to vote to recall them because that MP did something that was a little bit reformist and that people weren't happy with. Like, I maybe that's not the case. But anyway, go on. I just wanted to pick up that.
No, I think that's fair. I think it'd be like incredibly unprincipled if we did, like if we had someone like me, do something that was incredibly detrimental to the working class and then have the party be like, oh, well, that's fine. Like, I just don't.
But it wouldn't be incredibly detrimental. It would have been like a reformist strategic approach where you voted for something that was probably defensible. Like it was a real line ball call of whether to hold out for bigger change or whether to support some incremental reform. And you've come on under all this pressure from constituents who are saying, we really need you to support this. And you've made that wrong decision to settle for the piss weak reformist approach. In that context, where it's not like you've betrayed your class interests or betrayed the entire movement, you've just made this slightly crappy decision that other members wouldn't have made. They're probably not going to recall you over that. They're probably not going to replace.
I agree that, but like the thing is, the decision would be made in conjunction at this stage with how I understand it with the executive. And if there's more time, then you could have members-wide meetings and discussions. And like we would expect the branches to move motions, condemnation or support on a big issue, whatever, like all of that would be live and right to do in the same way.
And happening very quickly, you have to assume.
I don't feel like there's that much legislation that's that quick. Like a lot of the time the negotiations go on for some time and there's a lot of stuff that isn't released to the membership that the leadership know about and so on. So all that transparency, obviously you can't tell absolutely anyone, absolutely everything. But like at the very least, the party executive, which is directly elected and accountable, like they need to know every key decision. And then when there's time, I think the party as a whole can discuss. But the other thing is a lot of this happens before the pre-selection. Like the Greens have a very broad pre-selection in practice, like again, Sarah Hanson-Young, like I don't want to be too mean about her, but like she's a very, very moderate person. And then, there's people who are more radical. And so, okay, well, you've already got a problem then, haven't you? Because you've got this huge spectrum of politics. But actually, one thing they all agree with is that governing is the key way that social change happens, right? Because that is actually a key principle of the Greens. Balance of power is how we change politics and how we change legislation. Like that's
that's certainly been the narrative lately. Hey?
Yeah, that's like the medium-term vision. Or maybe the long-term.
Get us in balance of power. Yeah.
Maybe the long-term is replace Labor. Maybe sometimes that gets said, not that often, but maybe that's the goal long-term. But immediate term, it's like balance of power, shape things. Well, that's not our approach. Is the MPs are megaphones for the working class and the social movements, and so I would expect it to be a relatively rare event where we vote for a piece of legislation rather than the norm. Our goal isn't to be a governing partner with Labor. Our goal is to push the Overton window, fight for policies that would actually make a difference. And in the context of like a small technocratic improvement versus what Labor's actually trying to do, which is put a close, the housing issue was closed by the HAF.
Shut it down.
Know?
Yeah, close debate.
We would never close it like that. Like that's quite important.
And that was pretty much the kind of approach I took in my role as an elected rep. But I kind of had that luxury because it was an LNP establishment that was just consistently doing really shitty things. And I was very rarely wedged. I guess like I'm not trying to throw shit on anyone. I just think there needs to be a really robust recognition of the fact that throughout history, there are lots of political parties who've tried to do what you're articulating. And it's not that different to what the Greens have tried, I think. But we still haven't, as an answered the problem.
Because Jono, like I feel like it is actually really different to what the Greens have tried to do and are currently doing. Like, I respect a lot of what you've said and what you write and what you've done and stuff like that. But I do really disagree that there is a fundamental shared, like, sort of political strategy between the Socialist Party and the Greens, because the Socialist Party's long-term vision is of socialism with an anti-capitalist politics. The Greens, in their political practice, in the policies that they put forward, in the aims and in the Constitution, do not articulate an anti-capitalist or socialist political vision. And the arguments that are put forward by the party leadership, who you've acknowledged make all of the most important decisions about what the Greens party does, their current strategy is a balance of power strategy. So this is a different political project.
And like really early on in the Greens' history, like they formed a coalition government with the Liberal Party in Tasmania, like really early on.
Or in 2013, like basically held the balance of power with the Gillard government, which I think was the most right-wing Labor government, like nearly ever, basically.
Until Albanese, maybe. But yeah.
Well, I mean, the Gillard government, $3.2 billion cuts to education, the approval of a Pilbara mine, the capitulation on the mining tax, didn't fight for marriage equality, the East Timor solution where refugees were thrown offshore into concentration camps. And then the Greens, the way that they talk about that government was that they got partial dental cover for Medicare for children.
And a question in question time.
And I feel like what's kind of happening is you guys are seeing me as like, Jono, defend the Greens. I'm like, not interested in it. It's not. But what I'm trying to identify is that like what are the mechanisms, what are the cultural norms, what are the institutions that are going to be built into the DNA of the Socialist Party that will be different to all the other socialists and all the other radical communist parties around the world that have also tended towards either co-option or political irrelevancy. Like I can point, and I'm sure you guys can too, I can point to a few examples of socialist parties that have really stayed true to their values, that haven't sold out workers' movements, etc. And they plod along on 5 or 10%. And every time they start to push above 15 or 20%, they get relentlessly attacked by the capitalist class, the conservative media or whatever, and their vote drops back down and they lose some seats. Or there's a coup and they get, whatever. But like, I guess I'm just trying to sense check and reality check the aspiration that we will pre-select noble, righteous MPs who will be incorruptible and so staunch in the face of public pressure. They will still be mainstream appealing enough that they can get elected and then hold their seat over multiple elections. And that's the tension, because like I could hold my ward of like the Gabba, where it's like 50, 60% renters and a fairly young population. And I was very active in reaching out to people and managed to even convince some people who might previously have been centrists to shift their political thinking and embrace a more radical vision of how change should happen. But like, that's very, very hard when the full weight of the political establishment turns on you. And I don't want to say it's naive to think that we can't push back against that, because I'm still trying to do that as well. But I'm really interested in what are the processes, what are the practical steps? And I think Geordie was starting to outline them like 20 minutes ago before I interrupted you. But like, yeah, apart from being able to recall an MP when they compromise, and apart from having really robust pre-selections where you try to make sure the people you're putting into these hierarchical positions are as radical as possible, what else is there to ensure that that layer of staffers and full-time party hacks doesn't steer the party towards a more reformist position gradually over time, when you're like, you do have this overriding goal of holding a seat. Once you win a seat, a party really wants to hold on to it. That's sort of, go on. Sorry.
Yeah. I think, like, sorry to cut you off. I think it's just a completely different.
I'm talking way too much.
But yeah, it's just a completely different perspective. Because, like, for a socialist, I think Lenin was like, parliamentary struggle is the lowest form of struggle. It's just not our priority. It is obviously something that we want. But, one of the things, again, like we've spoken about it before, is not creating a special or privileged layer of MPs, like making sure that MPs are on a workers' wage, which is completely doable, recallable representatives, all that kind of stuff. But also, like, there's no challenge about being accountable to the entire electorate or your constituents or whatever, because we, like, for example, I'm running in the seat of Melbourne for this state election. If someone called up my office that was a small business owner that didn't like the protests or whatever, I don't give a fuck about that person. Sorry, you're not a member of my class. I don't give a fuck about you. Thank you very much. Like, you can shut up.
And I didn't give a crap about those people either. But it's more like what happens when the sort of lefty calls up and says, "I really think you should pass the government's rental reforms package."
Totally.
That's the trickiest stuff.
No, I think you're absolutely right to point to that. And that's why I said before, like, I think there are times, or there would be times, because we haven't had a chance yet really, but there would be times where we're just going to have to cop it and say, yes, everybody wants us to support this bill. We don't think it's good enough. And so we're going to draw a line and try and educate people as to why. And we could cop some heat about that, like it seems like Max, copped some heat for his stance about housing.
Yeah.
And then lost his seat.
Yeah. Does he regret the stance that he took? I'm not sure. You could probably tell me, but, like, I would hope that he doesn't. In fact, I would hope he thinks that he should have been even stauncher and crossed the floor
I don't want to speak for him, but I think he probably does wish they held out.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think, I mean, for people who are interested, there's another article on my page about, like, how the Greens' losses in state elections in 2024 really made the federal party room nervous. And then they, like, I mean, I think, like, in terms of things that the Greens and perhaps the Socialists should be doing differently, one of the most obvious thing is to say, we will never negotiate in private with the major parties.
Agreed.
If they want you to pass a bill, if you're in balance of power and they need your support, no closed door meetings.
That's right.
Like, that's something that should be baked into the whatever the pre-selection agreements or the party bylaws, and I think it's shitty that the Greens don't do that.
Yeah.
I think term limits is another one, because once, and I think this perhaps has happened with someone like Sarah Hanson-Young, once you've been a politician for a while and everyone in the party knows you, you've done a few things to piss off a few people, but, like, you're still on balance kind of a nice, friendly person when you go to the sort of party social function. Like, it's not enough to lose a pre-selection. So you need those term limits to sort of ensure that once someone's an elected representative, they don't accrue social capital within the movement and use that to keep winning pre-selections, even as they're gradually compromising and becoming more conservative over time. I think similarly, limits on who can be a chief of staff, because those end up being very powerful roles and should perhaps even be elected roles. Like, the MPs get to appoint their staff, but maybe the party should be saying, the MP can nominate someone as a chief of staff, but they have to be approved by a vote of the party membership in that branch or that regional. Like, those are the sorts of things that I hope the Socialists are looking at and saying, how can we deal with all these little forms of compromising and co-opting pressure so that problem that I've articulated doesn't emerge for you guys?
Yeah, I think they're good and useful and interesting sort of ways of thinking about the problems. Because, it's like parliamentary politics is never going to be something that is, like, just totally easy, smooth sailing. It's part of the reason, like, Omar, like, we're part of Socialist Alternative. We're a revolutionary organisation. Our tradition has a lot of skepticism towards the idea that politics and electoral politics can be the answer to, the ills of society or whatever. So you have to go into this stuff with an understanding that, there are political questions that will come up. The parliamentary politics is not the be-all and end-all, etc. But I wanted to just, because one of the things that you said in the article was about, being in the a Greens policy meeting and you have to sort of win a person, like some right-wing conservative person, to why landlords shouldn't exist or whatever. And I think like it's a valiant battle to have. But the suggestions that you make, the criticisms, the valid criticisms that you make of the Greens, which, you know, it's good that there's people making these arguments. Like, I think, you know, left-wing people inside the Greens, like, there's a really big political crisis that we're facing in society today. Like, the system of capitalism is just fucking up people's lives. Like the climate crisis, the rise of Pauline Hanson, One Nation.
Sure, we all agree with that. Yeah.
So I think that there's an opportunity here for left-wing people in Australia to rebuild a radical political movement. And I want to convince people who are part of the Greens to actually, and who are radical, who do see themselves as socialists, to actually help build a radical socialist movement. You know, like there's a political opportunity, and the Greens, their political approach has stagnated. And so we have to like face the crisis of the system with like a vision of politics that could actually transform things.
Because one of the things, Jono, is like, you talked about the pressure, and I don't know enough about the Gabba area in Brisbane or really any of the Brisbane seats, but like one of the things the Greens have done in Melbourne, and I assume it's similar there, is they tend to run and focus resources and energy in quite wealthy areas, with a very high mix of white collar workers definitely, and young people who are still, you know, they're working class, but also, you know, solidly middle class sort of professional types. And I think that does put a ceiling on how radical the politics can be to win majorities in those areas, right? And so we do know there's a left-wing constituency of white-collar workers and students in those areas. But then if you want to get 50% plus one in like Fitzroy or Higgins or Kooyong, you know, like there's a limit. There's a limit, right? Whereas the Victorian Socialists, one of our trademarks actually has been that we run, yes, we want to contest the inner city, but we want to contest the working class areas too, or the more traditional kind of mid-level and outer working class suburbs too, because we think it's disgraceful that Labor take these people for granted. And unfortunately, there's no alternative to them, because neither the Liberals nor the Greens really give a shit about that. And I think that's one of the differences, is actually medium term, I think the prospects for the left are higher in some of the middle ring suburbs, where it's more working class, more diverse.
Totally agree.
Less middle class.
And that's why, like, you know, in the last federal election, I put my effort into campaigning in the seat of Moreton, which is like Brisbane's outer southern suburbs, very high migrant population. Like, we were campaigning on Palestine, like out in the burbs, and connecting with people. And that was, I would say, like, in defense of the Greens, generally in the last couple of election cycles, they just focus on the electorates that have the highest proportion of young renters, because they've decided that those are the people that it is easiest to win over towards the sort of more radical vision in terms of the stuff that the Greens are prioritising. And that was kind of the case in the Gabba ward as well. Like, we had a few neighbouring wards that sort of also cared about the environment, but the Gabba ward was where there were lots of renters, and that's where we concentrated our resources and efforts so that we could win a seat and then build. I think that's a really interesting question, the extent to which a party spreads out into growth areas and gets really excited about winning 5 or 10% in a lot of outer suburban areas, versus whether you concentrate so you can actively cut through and win a seat. I would suggest that one of the reasons that the Greens have become so compromised in recent years is that the desire to win like lower house seats, or seats where you need a 50% plus one majority to actually win, versus when you're just contesting Senate seats, is one of those big pressures. And like the only federal seat that the Greens held in the House of Representatives now, Elizabeth Watson-Brown's seat of Ryan, compared to both the federal seat of Brisbane and the federal seat of Griffith, which we lost, Ryan is more affluent, higher rates of home ownership, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is shaping the politics, particularly of the Greens around Brisbane at the moment, and that's a real problem. But it's really hard. Like, it's easy to get 5 or 10 or 15% if the goal is to win a seat, and I think that should be the socialist goal. You do have to be willing to make some really ruthless calls about where the wins are, because the initial momentum and enthusiasm of like, great, we've got lots of people signed up, let's go out and campaign, that wears off after a couple of elections unless you start to get some wins, rightly or wrongly. And maybe the problem that a mistake the Greens made was that too much of the motivation and enthusiasm for campaigning for the Greens in recent years has been like, we can win this, rather than doing the harder work of convincing people you should campaign for this, even though we have no chance of winning, which we used to do more of, and which I think we don't anymore.
Yeah, like in Melbourne, it was about Brunswick. It was like the whole Melbourne Greens were in Brunswick, and I was campaigning in Scullin, which is like outer working class north, and the Greens volunteer from there was from Darebin, who I knew from a long time ago. Shout out to you, Stacey, if you're listening. And then the candidate was a local guy who was really sweet and nice, but like it was literally just him and this volunteer from Preston, and that was it. But that does say something about the prioritization. And like one of the things of the Greens in the last election is there actually was a vote increase in those areas, but like based on the media campaigning and the Palestine support and good stuff like that. But like the party's sort of not that interested in those areas, right?
Yeah.
And so
and it's hard to evaluate, like, because what kind of happened in the last couple of election cycles is that the party vote grew further out, as in the Greens vote, and it kind of dropped or stagnated in the areas where there was the most money concentrated on attack campaigns. Like that was the big factor, right? And particularly for, say, Maxine Griffith, like I think he would have held that seat comfortably, but the majors and various other forces spent a few $1 million on attack ads and all that sort of stuff. But I think there's just this interesting question of like why decisions about resourcing get made and who makes them. And in the Greens, increasingly, I think every election cycle, you'll have the existing elected reps saying, we really need more money in our seat to defend this seat. Otherwise, we could lose this seat. And again, you have elected reps and staffers who are winning arguments about where resources should be concentrated. Conversely, Adam Bant, last election cycle was like, don't worry, I'm safe. I don't need as many resources to defend Melbourne. You guys push resources further out into other seats so we can win more federal seats. And then he lost his seat. And there were a few reasons for that. And I think not taking a stronger position on some of the issues that the Greens folded on was one of them. But like when the full guns of the political establishment are turned upon you do need a lot of resourcing to defend that. And so that those questions about like who makes decisions about the messages you prioritize, where funding goes, where volunteers are encouraged to sign up for, that's a significant source of power and can also be a significant side of co-option. And parties need to think really deeply about how to decentralize that power and ensure that you strike the right balance between concentrating resources enough that you win a seat, but not at the expense of growth areas and building the movement among the people who are most oppressed and marginalized.
Totally. I guess one of the ways, like going back to the sort of party's overall vision and how that fits with the campaigning is like the Socialist Party over the last few years has been in Victoria, I would say, because it hasn't really existed for that long in the other places, really trying to sink roots into working class communities around the city and set up local branches and districts and so on. There's also a bunch of trade union groups that existed to kind of network with people in the union movement and fight for socialist politics and radical unionism in that space as well. So we're sort of better placed in a kind of electoral sense. But then it's also like, it makes us, I think, a bit less worried about losing some of the other seats, other things like the parliamentary seats, even though we would want them, because we actually can exist. Like the socialist movement in Australia has existed. When's the last socialist MP? Like maybe people say in the 80s, like there was one independent guy, like, so it's sort of the norm is to not have MPs, we don't need MPs. Like our party doesn't rely on them. So I guess, winning and losing, like the Footscray district of Victorian Socialists didn't collapse when George lost his seat in the Maribyrnong Council, It's so I guess, I think the more rooted you are, the less worried you are, I think, about losing your seats and the less bureaucratically, especially the people you attract as well. Like I know Melbourne. In Melbourne, the Greens are very much like lawyers. Like, no offense to you're a lawyer and Geordie's a lawyer.
And I think they're probably more centrist and reformist, right?
Yeah.
And I think you can draw a direct line between the fact that in the states and areas of the country where the Greens haven't had as many elected reps and haven't had as much establishment power, the branches are more radical. Whereas in the states like Victoria and Tasmania, where the Greens have had the most electoral success, they've been disciplined and co-opted over years and have become more conservative as a result. So like when I compare not just different branches within a state, but different states against each other, there's a reasonably consistent trend line where the more seats you win, the more conservative you get, or the more reformist you get, or the more risk averse you get. And I think, just that comment about
Not
you go,
always though. We've got like, what was the example? Cat McNamara in the Northern Territory, which, you know, Greens haven't exactly had, you know, massive electoral success in the Northern Territory, but like Cat McNamara voted for tougher bail laws for like Indigenous kids. So like that's not entirely.
It was really skewered by the party, right? And that was such an interesting example where like the Greens had finally got their first MP. It was someone they hadn't expected to win. Like she'd signed up to campaign, been told you have no chance of winning. Don't worry, you're not going to win. And then suddenly she's an MP. And the party hadn't set up mechanisms to tell her how to vote before she goes into Parliament. And then at short notice, there's a shitty bill, tough on crime bill that comes before Parliament. She's getting like 1,000 emails from people in her electorate saying, we need you to support this because crime's out of control. She's getting more emails from, you know, people who aren't in the party telling her to support this. And then the party structures aren't there to say, hey, Kat, before you go and vote on this, we need you to listen to us and check in with us. And I think I don't want to like throw shit on someone, but like there are reasons that she stepped down from that role and triggered a by-election. So yeah, but what I was going to say to Omar, and I'm mindful of time, is just that another of the co-opting forces as a party grows is that you've got members who are doing stuff with unions, with climate groups, with different kinds of, you know, refugee grassroots activism or whatever. And while a party is small and nimble, it is easy for the party as a sort of complete organism to roll in behind that thing and say, we're going to use our email lists and send everyone to this rally, and we're going to tell all our members and put our logo on the poster and all that sort of stuff. As a party gets bigger, there's a sort of innate risk aversiveness that evolves because the party has resources and it can get sued and there are compliance requirements and all this sort of stuff. And so it gets to the point where a party will be like, oh, before we can endorse that particular campaign to blockade that rental eviction, we need to run it past the Greens Executive Committee, and the Executive Committee will say, oh, well, actually, we don't know if we can make this decision until we've heard from all the branches because we're a Democratic Party, so we need to wait till the next state council. You know, it's always done in the name of democracy.
Yeah,
it's
of course.
We can't commit the party to a position until all the branches and the members have had to say.
Unless it's signing up to a Labor Party bill,
yes, exactly, right? Yeah. So the MPs have all this unilateral freedom to agree to speak at whatever rallies they want, to say whatever they want, to do whatever they want because they're MPs. But if the party as a broader organisation wants to roll in behind a struggle, then it's a slow process of building consensus, making sure everyone's on board with the party taking a position. And so what ends up happening is that you have Greens members who are unionists or Greens members who are chaining themselves to bulldozers or whatever, but they end up doing that not as like branded members of the Greens.
Yeah.
They just do that as Greens party members who are acting as individuals. And I think that's a really interesting difference about the Socialists is that like I find it annoying, but Salt is always there at a rally with the Socialist alternative flags complaining that, oh, where are all the Greens? And I'll look around and be like, oh, well, there are hundreds of Greens members here. I know all these people. They're all in the party, but they're not there with the green shirts and the banners. And that's almost just like a cultural difference. I don't think either approach is right or wrong, but I just share that as another example of how, like, as the party grows, you'll have more and more people with strong opinions about what struggles should and shouldn't be supported. And that can de-escalate some of the non-parliamentary forms of organising that the party might otherwise want to do. And that's one of the reasons that I think your factional tendencies are really interesting and perhaps a positive feature, because even if the party as a whole is too slow to move in behind certain struggles, individual factions might do that in a concerted way and sort of drag like vanguards within vanguards. That's cool and interesting. But
I definitely think that the existence of socialist alternative inside Victorian socialists as the key force that who helped create the Victorian Socialists and the sort of initiative for the expansion of the party federally, I think it's positive because we have inside our party people who are conscious of the limitations of electoral politics, the limitations of a reformist outlook, the limitations of progressivism as a political worldview, and want to argue for an uncompromising criticism of society at large. You know, it's like the Marx thing, like the communists disdain to conceal their aims, and we definitely disdain to conceal them. And so, yeah, I think like I said before, there's an important moment here for the building of a radical current in Australian politics. It's good to know that people like yourself, Greens members who are happy to continue to criticise the leadership of the Greens. But yeah, I think like we have to keep on building up social movements in this country, social movements on the streets, in workplaces, in our university campuses, and in electoral politics. And I think there's a real centrality to that as a political project.
Yeah, and thanks so much for having a chat to us. I feel like the issues you've raised are really useful to think about. Like I do think that
we could be talking more about this stuff all day.
We could, yeah. So
probably
we really
shouldn't subject our listeners to more than an hour of us going on.
So maybe just to wrap up, what's the name of your Substack or blog? Or
I don't use Substack because it's sold out to some corporation. JonathanSri.com, JonathanSri.com.
We'll link it.
I write a lot of rants about how the Greens aren't radical enough. But I'm really excited about the emergence of socialist parties again. I think it's really healthy for the political landscape. I hope it will keep the Greens a bit more honest and apply a bit more pressure to the left. But my biggest fear is that the socialists just kind of make the same structural mistakes that the Greens have made, and that you lose control of your MPs and your staffers once that layer emerges. That's the problem that I see within the Greens. And I want to be convinced that the socialists have got an answer to that. I still don't hear an answer to that, but I'm rooting for you.
Well, hopefully if any of us get elected, we'll assuage those fears, Jono.
Yeah, time will tell. Maybe we'll all sell out.
Thank you so much for your time, Jono.
Thanks, guys. Really appreciated the chat.
Riding out the party line.
Well, that was a really interesting interview with Jono. It was good to have him on. I mean, like, we've had some people from obviously different political kind of backgrounds to ours on the pod before, but never like for just a conversation about those different political approaches. So I thought that was like quite new and cool.
Yeah. Should we have Liberals?
No.
Labor?
I think they have to be like within the left.
Yeah, no, Jonathan's definitely part of the left.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, it's interesting, like I disagree with the terms on some of the terms in which he sets up the debate about, the capitulation and the slide into reformist politics, because I think that we have started the project with the perspective of we want to build an anti-capitalist movement in this country, which is different to how the
abolish capitalism.
Yeah, which is different to the perspective with which the Greens were set up with. And I think like why you set up a party matters even more than like the policy that you put on a leaflet. Like that actually is quite centrally important.
And the class forces that set up a party as well, like that makes a difference on the politics and stuff going forward, regardless of what the aims and the things say.
Like who you're orienting towards.
Totally.
Yeah, that's right.
But I think like anyone who's a socialist right now, they should join a socialist party rather than bang your head up against the wall trying to convince like small L liberals and like progressives of a radical political framework. Like if you're a socialist, you should be trying to build the socialist movement. You should be contributing to the very vital, very important task of building a fighting socialist left. And so if anyone is listening to this podcast and you've just come back from a policy meeting where you've been trying to win a vote about the need for a radical policy position, you could just come to our branch meetings. We talk about radical policy positions all the time.
Yeah, that's the basic. Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. And like the basic thing about talking about capitalism, it's not a minimal thing at all, right? It's about educating people to understand, yes, climate change is capitalism. Poverty is capitalism. War, exploitation, all these things are capitalism. When you name the system, well, then you begin to point that in the long run, this is the kind of movement we need to get rid of it, right? And so even if we're not saying absolutely every step of the way on our election leaflet, that's like an A5 thing, the arguments point in that direction. And we're definitely not going to be funding developers to build housing.
So I'm sure our comrades up in Queensland will be working with Jono in political movements like we work with all people on the left who want to be part of movements on the streets, on the university campuses, whatever, to fight against a common enemy, to fight around a common demand. But we hope that over the course of the next, years, we convince left-wing people around the place to throw their lot in with socialist politics.
And hopefully in the meantime, you stop that bloody Olympic Games stadium being built.
Yes.
Because fuck that thing. The last thing this country needs is more stadium.
But if there were more stadiums, we could have the... What was it? The drug Olympics?
Oh, yeah, the enhanced.
No, we don't want that.
Oh,
either.
we don't want it?
No.
I thought we were pro
I think it's
that.
kind of fun.
It's just an advertisement for fucking big pharma drug
it's
companies.
stupid, but I also like Real Housewives of Melbourne.
All right, guys, cut this app now. We're losing supporters by the minute.
Like and subscribe. Share with your
As
friends.
if they're going to do that after what you just said. Like, just cut.
Bye, guys.
That's great.